Hello, everybody. This is Larry Matty, co-founder of Serum Exchange, and we welcome you to the presentation, Looking for Errors, IVR, in All the Wrong Places. Our presenter today is Joe Owen, who's Vice President and General Manager of AVOKE Analytics, which is a Raytheon BBM Technologies company. Joe's been in this business for a very, very long time. He was previously Vice President and General Manager of Call Center Solutions at Empirics and has 25 years of experience turning technology innovation into practical business solutions. AVOKE is based, the software itself is really based on about 30 years of research and practice, and companies select AVOKE Analytics to optimize their customer satisfaction, revenue, and cost efficiency. Before we get started, just a couple of housekeeping items. Copies of all the presentations are located in the agenda section of the virtual conference site. Just go to the box where the description of the session is. There's a link to the PDFs. There'll also be links to all the recordings. We'll post them about 24 hours after the presentations. And we also urge you to go to the exhibit hall. There's a wonderful wealth of information in there. There's some great articles, white papers, some product information. So please go there. These are the folks who are supporting this conference. We also would like you to go into the lounge or try going into the lounge so you can speak to or chat with your colleagues. And we also have some of the presenters in the lounge as well. And also, we will be sending you a survey after the presentation, after today's presentation. We would appreciate it if you fill it out and send it back to us. We'll be holding a Q&A after Joe's presentation. Please send your questions in through the Q&A box on the lower right-hand side of your screen, and please avoid using the chat box to send us your questions. And here's Joe. Here you go.
Hi, Larry, and welcome, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. Hope the first day of the conference has been successful for you. We love these conferences that Serum Exchange puts together. What a great organization. What a neat way to get together and do some knowledge exchange right from our desktops and right from our offices. So what are we going to talk about today? Well, you all have reviewed, of course, all the abstracts, selected which sessions to attend. This is the section that the abstract you read to join us, so we'll jump right into it. Looking for IVR errors in all the wrong places, and also my thanks as well to Sherry at Serum Exchange for helping us come up with this clever little abstract, looking for love in all the wrong places, in this case, looking for errors in the IVR. So this is a conference, of course, about workforce management and performance, and so one might ask, why are we talking about the IVR in a conference where we're focused on agent performance and we're focused on scheduling and workforce optimization? And the reason is because the IVR impacts what happens with our agents, with the workload, with the call volume that we have to schedule and handle, and with our agent's ability to handle these calls. And so let's be very specific about what kind of problems we actually see the IVR causing downstream. For many of us, the IVR is something that's sort of out of sight, out of mind. It's managed by another team, and our customers interact with the IVR. And then they wait in a queue, and then they land at our agent's desk. And what happened to the call before it got to us is sort of not visible. And yet it can have quite an impact on our workload. It can not only increase agent-handled volume, and therefore impact queue times and impact the number of agents we need to have scheduled, but it can also stretch out the time it takes for the agent to handle that call. So in the first category, it's pretty obvious, right? If self-service doesn't work, if the IVR isn't able to self-serve the call, that call is going to land on an agent's desk. But IVRs also sometimes route the calls to the wrong place. And of course, when that happens, the call is handled first by the wrong agent and then gets transferred to be handled by the second, the right agent. And so we've turned a call into, two agent-handled calls. And so we're driving up call volume by having misroutes require transfers. And then talk time, the way this unfolds is callers in particular who have a difficult time in the IVR can land at the agent with sort of an attitude, with a problem, and with a frustration, and that now complicates the dialogue. And so, a seemingly normal question about the customer's ID information or about why they're calling can turn into this, out-of-control dialogue because the customer has gotten torqued up by the IVR, and now we've made the job of controlling the call and handling the call more difficult for the agent because of what the IVR has done to that customer before they've gotten to our agents. Customers can waste time now going on and on about how much they hate the automated systems, or going on and on about how they have to provide the same information they just provided in the IVR. And so, these are the issues that that aren't necessarily visible to us, but can be directly impacting what we're doing in the center, and can be directly impacting our agent's ability to do the job. Honestly, from an agent perspective, when we talk to our representatives and we say how important it is to deliver great service and how critical it is and how service-oriented we are as a company, when they go back to their desk and they hear customers complain about the IVR, it kind of makes all that messaging feel hollow, right? Because we go on and on about how important customers are, and then we find out that we've got this automated system that, is programmed to abuse every customer before you give the customer to me, the agent, to handle that call. So, it can have an impact overall on sort of, how genuine our messages sound to our agents about the commitment we have to customer service. If we allow an IVR system to continue that isn't helpful, that in fact erodes the agent's ability to handle that call well. So let's talk about looking in all the wrong places. Here are, 4 of the things that we encounter in working with our customers that are well-intentioned, but really take teams off in the wrong directions, and can be really damaging and difficult and a waste of time and effort if you're pursuing one of these sort of misguided initiatives in the interest of improving the value of the IVR. So let's tick through each of these one by one and talk about why are these the wrong things to do. So the first one, IVR containment. Well, containment is just it's an old metric, and I look forward to the day when we can discover that it's gone, because it's just such a terrible metric. It really, it's not focused on helping the customer. It's not focused on resolving the call. It's containment. It's keep the customer in the IVR. Keep the customer away from the agent. Certainly don't want that to happen. It's sort of like anti-customer, anti-resolution, anti-service, this concept of containment. And we the idea being that any call that we can keep in the IVR is a good thing. And of course that is just completely false, because it makes this huge assumption that a call that ends in the IVR was actually resolved in the IVR, and that is not the case. It's not uncommon for us to see, half of the calls in the IVR ended in the IVR with no service. So they were contained but not resolved. They were contained but not served. And so how does this happen? Well, customers get sort of befuddled by the menu choices. They don't recognize the menu choices. They go down a path and they get 2-3 steps down deep in the menu, and then they realize they're in the wrong place and they have no idea how to get back out, so they just hang up the phone. Or they get in one of these retry or error loops. We see situations where either intentionally or because of a bug in the application, there's no global error counter, right? And so we submit the customer to these just terrible retry and error. I'm sorry I didn't get that. Please try again. Well, after the 5th or 6th time, some customers are like, forget it, just hang up the phone. That was contained in the IVR but not resolved, right? And so these are just situations that the IVR containment metric actually celebrates, and yet they're not good service, they're not resolved calls. Every one of those is going to be a callback, right? Because if the customer hangs up the phone, they give up and say, forget it, I'm done with this, I have to call back in to try to get what I need, they're likely to do what? They're going to hang up the phone, they're going to call back immediately, and they're going to zero out, and they're going to immediately they're going to get out of the IVR. So now we've basically trained this customer never to use our IVR, and we're basically increasing agent workload because we're teaching this customer when they call us, say agent immediately, say representative immediately, hit zero immediately, and so that's just obviously not a good thing. And so this is a metric that really doesn't guide the organization in the right direction. It causes us to celebrate the wrong thing. It doesn't keep, it keeps us focused on the wrong things. It like keep customers away as opposed to resolve their questions, service them. And containment really is, especially in the multi-channel world we're in today, containment really fails to represent the business value of the IVR. Because as more and more simple transactions go to other channels, the self-service opportunity in the IVR is starting to be sort of limited because phone calls are increasingly containing more difficult questions. And therefore, the simple questions that used to be serviced in an IVR module aren't necessarily there anymore. So if all we think about is self-service, we're missing a lot of the value of the IVR, which is route the caller to the right place, and ID the caller so that the agent can do some proactive stuff. If we can ID the caller in the IVR, we can do proactive routing in the IVR, we can do some proactive messaging in the IVR, if we ID the caller, we can get the caller to the right agent more quickly, and we can speed the resolution of the call. So containment misses these other two huge areas of value in the IVR, IDing the caller and correct routing. So if any of you are still using IVR containment, I hope this has helped you sort of put the nail in the coffin of that metric and get it out of there and start thinking about other ways to measure IVR value. Okay, what's another misguided effort that we see in trying to maximize IVR value? Well, for a while there was this concept that we ought to have self-service parity. Anything you can do in the IVR, you should be able to do in the web, and vice versa. So if we build a self-service function in the web, we should offer it in the IVR too. Let customers self-serve anywhere they want to be. Offer the same self-service functions in every channel, and therefore, no matter which channel you choose, you'll be able to do your self-service task. Well, this is really an overly simplistic approach. It really, it tends to be driven by the technology side of the organization, right? Because they build some APIs in your back end, they build some web services, they build the business logic, and once they've built the transaction logic, they want that transaction to show up everywhere. Show up on the website, show up in the IVR, show up, in the agent desktop, show up in as many places as we can. We've built the logic, we've built the back end, let's take advantage of it. What that ignores is customer behavior. Customers don't necessarily want to do the same things on your website that they want to do in your IVR. And so what you end up doing is wasting time and money putting functions in the IVR that customers don't want or need. And if it were just that, if it were just that you were wasting money putting a function in the IVR, it may not be so bad. But IVRs have this other attribute, which is the more stuff you put in them, the less well they work. Small menus are good. Fewer functions means there's fewer opportunities for the customer to get lost. And so the best IVR has only the most frequently used options in it. And if you pile more self-service features in the IVR, you actually, not only do you waste money on features that nobody's going to use, but you actually hurt the functions that people are going to use. And so in the studies that we've done and the work we've done with customers over the time, it shows you that when you add lots of self-service functions, you hurt the ones that people really want to use. You don't just have litter in there that nobody's using, you hurt the ones that people want to use. And so why is that? It's because when you present so many options, people choose the wrong one, and they get confused about which one to choose, and they miss choosing the one they would have used. So if you only have 3 self-service functions, chances are they're going to pick the right one. If you have 6 self-service functions, some people who should have picked the first one are going to get confused and pick the 5th and the 6th. And so So this is really, really a terrible thing. It's an overly simplified. It sounds great. Let's have the same self-service functions available everywhere. It also sounds great to kind of like leverage the back end and put the transactions in every channel. But in the IVR, it's really, really a bad idea. And it's kind of a cop-out for taking the time to really understand what is it that customers want to do in the voice channel. All right, great. And let's understand those in terms of volume. What's the most frequently desired task in the IVR, second most frequently, third most frequently. Okay, let's draw the line there, and let's service, 80% of the transactions in the IVR in 3 modules and not build anything else. That might be the best IVR you could think of. So this is, another item that is frequently kind of takes companies down a bad path. What's the third one? Well, the third one is speech tuning. Now, I'm not saying that speech tuning is a bad thing, right? Recognizers, they decay. They're not low maintenance items. Speech recognizers have to be maintained. That is certainly true. This is one of the big differences between speech and touch tone. Touch tone kind of is stable. Speech is not. Speech systems erode if you don't do the tuning, and so you have to do the tuning. But what we do find sometimes is that there's an inordinate focus on the recognizer, and folks are spending too much with their speech vendor, right? They get talked into this idea that you need to do 2 or 3 tunings a year, in order to keep your recognizer at peak performance, and so you retrain the statistical language model and re-examine the thresholds and all that stuff. And so you end up putting a lot of effort into the recognizer, and it's the forest for the trees issue. You're so focused on the trees, you miss the fact that you're in the middle of a forest. And what that means here is that you're so focused on recognizing what the customer said that you miss the fact that you asked the wrong question of the customer, right? So if you step back and look at the dialogue, you say, well, wait a minute. Why are we asking the customer this question? Or why are we asking it in a way that the customer is confused about how to respond? And so the issue here is maintaining a balance between dialogue design, what are we asking the customer and how are we asking it, and recognition performance, are we capturing the customer's utterance or customer's response? And what we see sometimes is that this gets out of balance. We see a lot of effort into recognition performance and a lot of effort into misrecognition and recognizer thresholds and noise suppression. A lot of focus on that and not enough focus on the broader dialogue design questions. And so it's tough because your speech vendors love to sell tuning projects. And the recognizer will never be perfect. There always will be utterances that aren't recognized correctly. So it can be easy to be trapped in this idea that we just need to do tuning, and we can't stop tuning, we can't skip the tuning cycle. But boy, oh boy, it's critical that you also step back and understand broader dialogue issues and not just inordinately focus on speech recognition. All right, one more left in this category of all the wrong places, and that is IVR satisfaction scores. Of course, customer satisfaction scores are crucial, and every company is tracking them in some form or another. You might be using, customer satisfaction. You might be using Net Promoter. You might be using customer effort, but we're all trying to understand customer satisfaction in a way that we can maximize retention and maximize repurchase behavior. And so, sometimes what companies then do is we take an overall satisfaction score and we try to push it down and say, okay, well, let's see, in order to understand overall satisfaction, how satisfied were you with the product? Okay, great. How satisfied were you with the purchase process? Okay, terrific. How satisfied were you with the agent? How satisfied were you with just this last agent that you spoke to just now? Not every agent, but just in answering these questions, please think about just the last agent you spoke with. I mean, we've all heard, that survey. How satisfied were you with the IVR? So you kind of push satisfaction down in order to understand the components. And at least in the IVR, this really breaks. People just don't think about the IVR in a way that you can get a meaningful satisfaction score for the IVR. And we've actually done correlation studies with our customers on how do they answer the question, how satisfied were you with the automated phone system or something like that, and take those responses and plot those against things that are important. So things that are important meaning repurchase behavior, retention, compare that to how they answered the overall CSAT question about your company. Compare that to transaction success in the IVR. Do people who have a good IVR experience give us better satisfaction ratings than people with a bad IVR experience? And what we find overwhelmingly is that the IVR satisfaction scores are just useless. And there's we have a couple ideas for why that is. I think we're in a world where people just don't like IVR systems. And there's this sort of general dislike of automated phone systems that overpowers any sense of whether their last experience was good or bad. And so you can see the general dislike. This survey that was done last summer, May of 2012, two-thirds of customers said, of people surveyed, two-thirds that said that IVRs have not gotten any better in the last decade. And if you break that down, half of those are 36%. Not only does it not get any better, they got worse over the past decade, and 30% said they were completely static. And think about, somebody mentioned to me the other day, iPhones didn't exist 6 years ago, and yet the perception is that IVRs have not improved or gotten worse. And two-thirds of consumers think that. So, to me, that's just a horrific indictment of, IVR technology and how we're using it, but it also just tells you how people feel about IVRs. And so if the general perception is that we don't like these things, then, that's what you get in the satisfaction survey. People just don't like automated phone systems, and they're just going to tell you they don't like them. And so let me give you two other really interesting pieces of data. We had one customer do an experiment. They were doing IVR stat surveys, and they had a goal to get their satisfaction level to some number. And they said, okay, let's try something. Let's take for a period of time, let's send customers directly to an agent. So let's run a bunch of calls right past the IVR. Take them immediately to a live voice operator or a tier 1 agent. And then let's, see what they feel. And even the customers who skip the IVR entirely and go straight to agents thought the IVR was horrible. So, that kind of supports this idea that there's this general perception of IVRs that just overwhelms this question for any specific IVR. And the other thing that we've done, I think I mentioned this in the correlation studies, if you take the response to that question, how satisfied were you with the automated phone system, and you try to correlate that to Net Promoter, or you try to correlate that to overall satisfaction, there's no correlation. So people can think the IVR is terrible, but they rate you high on Net Promoter. Or they rate you high on overall satisfaction, yet they think the IVR is sort of horrible. And people who think the IVR is great don't necessarily do not give you any better score in Net Promoter, don't give you any better score in overall satisfaction. So IVR satisfaction, a good idea, this general idea of push satisfaction scores down to the little sub-processes and push it down to lower levels, but it just unfortunately falls apart when you get to the IVR. So that's it. That's our tour of all the wrong places. So if those are the wrong places to look, where are we going to look? We've kind of covered two things so far. The fact that the IVR impacts our center. It impacts agent performance. It impacts the call volume we have to schedule and stat for. It impacts the agent's ability to control and manage the call. It impacts agent talk time. So IVRs are important, A, and B, the other thing we've covered is that some of the directions that people take with IVR for them specifically are actually just non-productive. So where are the right places to look? Well, the right places to look are to focus on task success in the IVR and to focus on customer effort in the IVR. And let's go into that in a little more detail. So task success, this gets back to the question of what are good metrics, what are the right metrics, what are valuable, helpful metrics to measure in the IVR. If containment doesn't take us down the good path, what will take us down a good path? Well, fundamentally, IVR systems have, three jobs. identify the customer. If they're not going to be handled by self-service, get them to the right agent, and hopefully do some self-service, either full or partial. And by partial self-service, we mean, at least take care of one or two or three steps so that the agent doesn't have to. Take a little bit of work off the agent's desk by doing a couple of tasks in the IVR and then give the customer to the agent. That's a partial self-service. So we're going to look at each of these then and think about metrics that map to those three broad areas of value in an IVR system. So in ID, we have to go a little farther. A lot of times we'll see ID success rate tracked. What percent of customers ID successfully in the IVR? And that is, it's a fine high-level metric, but you really have to break that down into two pieces. Because some people may not ID because you didn't ask them, right? Depending on where you put ID in your flow, there may be a large number of customers that never even get asked to ID. For example, when there's a single toll-free number, we frequently see this in, calls that go down sort of the sales path. And if they go down the sales path, we're not going to ask them to ID in the IVR. We're going to get them right to a representative so we can figure out what they want to buy and we can sell them something. But if they go down the technical support path, we're going to try to identify them so we can spot their product and screen pop something useful to the agent. So you have to first start out with what percent of callers are even asked. And then you might step back and say, wait a minute, that's odd. We're only asking 15% of the callers for the ID, but we know 30% of the callers are technical support. Now we can go in and say, well, how come we're only requesting ID from half of our technical support calls? So that's the first thing you need to figure out is how many are being prompted for ID, and is that the right number given the kind of calls you're getting? And then, of those who are prompted for ID, how many succeed? So once we get them in the ID module, how many successfully get out the back? And that's a really important number. You should have, a very high number, 90%, 80-90% success rates in the ID module. So once you get them starting the ID flow, you just got to stay on that module and get the success rates as high as possible. And by the way, this gets back to our speech tuning question, right? In the ID module, frequently where you see people struggling with speech recognition, and when you look at it, you say, well, you're asking for the wrong value. You're asking the customer for something they don't know. Give me your contract number. I don't know my contract number. I know my phone number. I know my social. But my contract number, so if you ask for an obscure piece of data, that's a problem. So ID success, and those are the two metrics. What percent are we prompting for ID? And of those who start the ID module, how many get to the end of it successfully? Routing accuracy. Routing accuracy, did we get the callers to the right place? If we get them to the wrong agent, it's going to be an unsatisfying experience. They're going to have to be transferred. That's, it's two agent handled calls. It's a waste of time, waste of money. Customer's not happy. So what can we do to make sure the IVR gets the caller to the right agent the first time? And so we have to do an analysis of a mapping of selections in the IVR versus the true reason for the call. And of course, you don't even really know that. We don't really know the true reason for the call until the customer gets to an agent and they really work on the question. They find out what agent does some probing, and we find out now what the actual reason for the call is. And so routing accuracy requires examining the agent dialogue to pull out the true reason for the call, and then go back and look at the IVR selection and see, given the true reason for the call, did they make the right selection in the IVR? And if they didn't, then you have to stand back and say, well, maybe we're not asking the customer the right question. Or maybe they didn't understand the options correctly that we gave them because we worded it incorrectly. Not that the callers are misbehaving. It's because we asked the question in a funny way, or we presented a set of options that were hard for them to understand. And so they generally made the choice they thought was right, but they ended up in the wrong queue. Okay, so we have to do this comparison of the agent dialogue to the IVR selections to truly understand routing accuracy. And of course, if you do that, then you can basically take your transfers and you can pull them into sort of a couple of separate piles. You can say, here are some transfers that are valid transfers due to policy and escalations and, legitimate reasons, and here's a bunch of transfers that are simply there because IVR is putting callers in the wrong place. So that's, those are valuable and helpful metrics. And then, of course, full self-service, and that's being defined as a call that is resolved and contained. It ends in the IVR, and it ends after successful completion of a self-service module. So we know the caller made a selection, they got into self-service, they performed the self-service task, they got information back from the self-service task, and the call ended normally. That's a full self-service, and a partial self-service, of course, is a call where something happened in the IVR successful. We got through a self-service module, but then the customer had another question or had a follow-on question. So there are, that's a set of task success metrics. Much more interesting. They're focused on the value of what we need to get from the IVR as opposed to containment, which is kind of like, please keep callers away from me. So the second set of interesting metrics are metrics around effort. And these are the things that, that drive customers nuts. These are the things that unfortunately have sort of taught most people to kind of really dislike IVR systems. And it's the stuff that you bump into in the IVR that sort of, lengthens the time you're going to be on the call, that makes you sit there and listen to more wordy, stupid prompts that I don't want to listen to, that, makes me feel like I'm being kept from the person who's going to help me. So these are the tough things. And from the customer standpoint, they're actually relatively easy to measure, but they're the hard things that contribute to this sense of, this is harder than it should be. This is taking more effort on my part than it should. So, well, first of all, failures then in the actual self-service or the ID modules, right? So a customer is playing ball. They are trying to ID themselves, and they fail out. Or they are playing ball, they seem willing or cooperative, to go down self-service, and yet they're unsuccessful. These are really tough. I mean, here's a customer who's going down the path. They want to play. They want to play along. They want to cooperate. And for some reason, the way we've built that task, the ID task or the self-service task, we can't handle the customer. I see some people say, well, those are no plays. Those are customers that refuse to play. Well, that's blaming the customer. And I think, that's not helpful. So, calling self-service failures or ID failures, those are no plays, are just, turfing it off on uncooperative customers, as opposed to saying, wait a minute, those customers who didn't play, they got to an agent, and guess what? With the agent, they were able to ID themselves, and they were able to pay their bill. So, it's not that they were unwilling to play. They actually got to an agent, and they did the piece of business. They satisfied their need. They got their question answered. It's just that the way that the agent did the process is different than the way that IVR did the process. And so for the very same task, we've got a hard-to-use process in the IVR, and the agent's got a simple a way to do the same task cooperatively. And so, you look at those failures, and you, again, follow those calls out to the agent, and see how the agent is successful where the IVR failed, compare the two processes and go, aha, here's an opportunity for improving the dialogue in the IVR. Unsolicited opt-outs. This is a great one because, customers nowadays, they don't wait for you to say, and you can press 0. They don't wait for you to say, say agent to get to a representative. You don't have to offer it. It doesn't have to be solicited. Customers these days, at some point, will just blurt it out. They'll, agent, representative, or they'll just beat on the 0. And so, where customers are screaming for the agent, asking for a representative, pressing 0, where we haven't given them that option, that's an indication that they're at the edge. Something's wrong. They're not happy about something. They feel like this is just too dang hard. Error outs. Error outs are where, the IVR says something, indicating an error, right? Too many retries, or maybe it could be a back-end problem. It could be, some database isn't available, and so the system errors out and says, I'm sorry, I can't proceed, So this is where the system is essentially causing the caller to be kicked out. The next one, customer hangs up in frustration. So, these are calls where the customer chooses to stop the process seemingly abruptly. A customer just sort of hangs up the phone. And we call these abandoned. It's kind of like a queue abandon, right? Normally when we talk about abandons, we think about a customer in queue. They've been waiting too long. They're tired of waiting. Customer hangs up the phone in queue. Well, this is the same concept. It's an IVR abandon. It's the customer gets a sense that they're not making progress. And so they hang up the call and they abandon. Multiple retries, that's pretty obvious. Counting the number of times, the system says, hey, I couldn't get that, please try again. Long time in the IVR. IVRs are, one way to sort of make a customer cooperate is to continue the sense that you're making progress. And so there's a period of time upon which customers just don't want to be in the IVR any longer. It actually depends on industry. It depends on the nature of your caller. It depends on the nature of the transaction. But we've seen it, at 2 minutes or at 4 minutes, almost regardless of what the customer's doing, success rates just kind of fall off. And opt-outs kind of jump, at a point in time. And so, understand what your customer's tolerance is to stay in your IVR and actually measure the percentage of calls that are greater than 2 minutes, if that's where your fall-off point is, or greater than 4 minutes. And then, of course, finally, customer expressing frustration, that's just people blurting out, talking to a touch-tone IVR, saying something that indicates that they're unhappy. What percentage of calls have a verbalized frustration inside the IVR? Another really interesting metric. So a bunch of metrics, and the question then, and I guess we sort of alluded to this in the outline, how do you use analytics to help with this? Well, all those metrics we just went through can be measured by software now. Systems have gotten great at either using speech recognition or using application data or using other sophisticated recognition kinds of technologies to actually pull this data out. And, here's a screenshot from our system. There's other systems that do this as well, but you can see 4 customer effort metrics in the IVR: unsolicited opt-outs, excessive time in the IVR, abandons, retries. Use analytics. Define a set of metrics, and then get an automated system. So it's not a special scoring task by the quality team. It's not some difficult one-time, or twice-a-year manual effort to get a handle on these metrics and to start trending them. Because you want to trend them over time so you can see how policy changes and process changes and product issues, cause those metrics to fluctuate, and then you can stay on top of that proactively and really manage the value and the performance of your IVR. The other thing analytics can do to help you in optimizing IVR is to help you really understand the caller's intent. One of the really challenging things about being in the IVR business is, we're over here focused on this IVR section of the call, and we really don't know the customer's intent because there's so little information exchange in the IVR. A couple of digit presses, responding to a few questions. We just don't have a lot of information about why the customer's calling and about what they want to do. And where that intent information is located, it's located here in the agent conversations. That's where the caller says, oh, I was calling about this. And then the agent maybe asks a few probing questions to clarify what they need. And then at the end of that probing exercise, now you have true intent. And when you have true intent, you can then take that information back and you can reflect on, okay, now I understand what was in their head, so now I understand why they behaved the way they did in the IVR. And so analytics can help reassemble this whole call, or even better, not break it up to start with, capture it as an end-to-end experience so that you can go downstream in the call, in the agent dialogues, discover true intent, and use that insight then to really improve the dialogue and the structure and the design of your IVR. And so another big value of analytics, because without analytics, piecing together the pieces of this call to understand it was impossible in most environments. And so analytics can be hugely valuable. And so then, once you have this combination of whole call view along with some metrics, you can watch the metrics in order to spot issues and trends. And then in many analytics systems, and ours is one of them, you can go underneath the analytics, underneath the data, to actually listen to the experience. You can say, well, let me listen to that failure and understand exactly what happened, or let me listen to what happened right where they opted out, and figure out what's going on there. And then you go, okay, now I understand the failure mode a little better. But what was the customer really trying to do? Well, let me jump ahead and hear the customer talk to the agent. Now I know what the customer was trying to do. So now we really have complete information, right? We have a problem and how big it is in the data. We have a more detailed understanding of the actual failure or behavior in the IVR by being able to drill right to audio inside the IVR. And we understand intent by rolling ahead to hear what the caller ultimately did with an agent. And so this then gives you the set of information you need using analytics in order to really do focused, tuned, targeted, precise improvements to the IVR. So this probably all sounds interesting. One of the questions I get is, all right, sounds great, but compared to all the other issues we're dealing with, is this a big problem? Is it a small problem? And the answer, unfortunately, is it kind of depends on your center. But let me share some data with you based on some benchmarking that we do. So it's not uncommon for us to see on the order of 30% of callers attempting an opt-out, even though we haven't told the customer that's an option. And so 30% of calls attempting an opt-out, every one of those is driving up calls offered. Okay? If we'd kept them in, we could have possibly resolved that call in the IVR. So every time that happens, we've driven the customer to the point of saying, let me out of here, and we're creating another agent-handled call. Almost 25% of calls, 22% of calls, we collect customer data in the IVR, and then we don't give it to the agent. That's probably the number one sin that we see, gathering information and not passing it along to the first or second or third agent that's going to service the call. And what does that do? Well, of course, it drives up talk time, right? Because we're wasting agent time performing tasks that we've already performed earlier in the call. And by the way, that is typically the 1, 2, or 3 in the hit parade of most dissatisfying things people complain about the most is providing the same information over and over again in the call. So you can see the frequency with which we observe these kind of problems occurring, and these are just some of the more frequent kind of issues we see in IVR systems. And then over here you can see which ones are driving up calls offered and which ones are driving up talk time. So these are significant issues. All right. So we covered this a little bit in the pictures, but here's where analytics, in particular whole call analytics, and when we say whole call, we mean dialing the hang up. Not just analyzing the recording of my agent speaking with the customer, but the customer's end-to-end experience, dialing the hang up, no matter where the call went. Let's understand the entire service delivery process. And the entire customer experience. So if we have analytics that can do that, what do we get? Well, we get automated measurement of those metrics. That's all we need is more metrics that take manual effort to tabulate. Well, they don't have to be manual. These systems can do automated measurements of task success and automated measurements of customer effort. They give us visibility of the issues that impact agents and customers. We can see the connection now between the IVR and how hard it is to do a good job as an agent, and we can see a connection between issues in the IVR and what that does to customer satisfaction. So we can make these connections, these correlations that we couldn't make before. And we have the data now to drive change. Trying to get funding, investment, effort, management attention for making a change in the IVR can be challenging because there are just so many places where we can invest today in the contact center. So how do we make this compelling case that this is the place where we ought to spend the next dollar to make a difference? Well, if we can use analytics to basically give data about how big the benefit will be of making a change, because analytics now has told us this is 28% of my calls, right? And it's causing an extra 15 seconds of handle time every time it happens. All right, you've got my attention now. I know how big the problem is. And since we've been able to drill through the data and really observe what happened, and we know something about intent, we have a root cause understanding so we can be very precise. We don't come in and say, hey, this is a big problem, and here's 5 things we want to try, all right? Throw a dart to the dartboard and see if one of them works. We basically say, look, this is a big problem. We've measured the size of the problem, and we understand exactly why it happens. And so all I want to do is make this change, this small change, in how this prompt is worded, and it's all going to get better. So you get to very precise sort of changes mapped to very specific descriptions of how big the issue is, and that gets people to say, all right, great, let's go fix that one. So analytics can really help make these things actionable. I mentioned this concept of whole call, and this just illustrates kind of what we described. The most important thing is it's dialing to hang up all transfers. Partners, not just our centers, but partner centers. This is really a cloud approach to analytics. You push it up into the network so that you can watch the call no matter where it goes, no matter how it's handled. It can be handled by an outsourced partner in the Philippines and then brought back to an internal center in Cleveland. And whole call analytics systems can actually follow that with no premise technology. Isn't that cool? You could actually follow a call through your outsourced partners without having to put any technology at the outsourced center, without having to touch the switch that your outsourced partner operates. Kind of mystery shop, if you will, your vendors, your partners that operate call centers and provide agents for you. So whole call analytics has a bunch of really interesting attributes, not just the fact that it's cloud-based, but also the fact that we can see the entire service delivery process, the total cost of providing that service, and the total customer experience. Just to be a little more clear about how that works, so just to show one more picture, and then we'll get on to some questions. So the way that this whole call approach works is it's actually in the phone network. So here's your call center, and you see no new technology, nothing being installed, here at the prem. We're actually putting this system in the phone network, and so calls actually pass through the system while the call's in the phone network, and so the call can be delivered here to an internal center, to a partner center. We can drop it off at a hosted IVR provider and then use take back and transfer to move it somewhere else. All of that happens downstream, and since the analytics system is sitting in the phone network, we keep tracking the call no matter where it goes. So that gives you this end-to-end view, and then we have a full audio record, a complete recording. We can extract all sorts of information from the audio in order to do categorization and trending, and then you can drill down from the data to specific calls. You can listen inside the IVR. You can, mystery shop your partners. You can see both sides of every transfer. Isn't that cool? So you can finally get the information you need to really understand transfers because we have both sides of the transfer. We can hear, the first agent and how the first agent explained why the transfer had to happen, and we can hear the second agent, and we can see whether the reason for transfer was actually confirmed by the second agent. So really, really powerful stuff that way. All right, so, can this make a difference? Absolutely. So, a couple of case studies. Here's a situation where in this center they had a very low ID rate, and the problem was that the identification process was based on product and product serial number, and the process that the agents used was very different than the process that the IVR used, and so it was a matter of really examining how ID was being done in different parts of the call, and then agents had created a nice, smooth flow to get the ID information from the customer. Let's replicate that process in the IVR, and they saw a tremendous increase in ID rate. Took 27 seconds off every call. I mean, what a huge win that was. And let's see another one, misroutes. So here's a case where transfers were just way too high, and they needed to understand, where are these transfers coming from, and by using analytics, they could observe, as I said earlier, both sides of every transfer, and then once you have intent from observing that, you can roll back to the IVR and say, aha, I can see why why the customer sort of made the selection they did and put themselves in the wrong place. So here, taking this sort of end-to-end analytics approach reduced transfers by a factor of 2. So that is the material. Thank you so much, everyone, for hanging around for the presentation. I believe this is the last session of the day, so I very much appreciate all of your attention. Larry, if we have some questions now, I'd love to take them.
Well, thank you, Joe, for that very, very fine presentation. Yes, we have several questions, several very good questions, as a matter of fact. The first question we have is, are these surveys that you mentioned across different industries or specific to certain types of IVRs?
Well, let's see. That's a good question. I wish I knew what slide we were on. He's asking these surveys. So we talked about a few different kinds of surveys. Let me just say that surveys, it's got to be specific to industry. We just see a lot of things that are done that are counterproductive because we have survey data across all types of industries or across all types of IVRs, and we think that's going to work in our center. Rules of thumb are just not that valuable. It turns out that different companies have different ways that they want to interact with their customers. Some companies are high touch, some are low touch. You really have to get data specific to your center, your customers, your products, your industry for things to be valuable. So we tend to shy away from using anything that's too broad-based, too generic, that cuts across too many industries and types of transactions, because the more that happens, it seems good, like it's a bigger data sample, but it gets so generic it's just not useful.
Okay. Is it possible to have situations where clients deliberately choose the shortest IVR picks that they would get them to the agent quickest because they don't want to bother trying to figure out the IVR picks? How to encourage clients not to do this?
Oh, of course. I mean, there certainly are environments where customers game the IVR, and the classic one is that customers choose sales because they know sales gets them right to an agent, whereas if they choose customer service or technical support, they're going to get a whole bunch of additional questions. So that absolutely happens. So the way to sort of resolve that, so I guess we have to look in a particular environment what gaming is going on, because the solution is going to depend on the gaming tactics that your caller is using to kind of get around your IVR. Some companies find that it's better to provide a separate toll-free number for sales versus the toll-free number for customer service and support. That's great, because if they call customer service and support, the sales option isn't there. There may be some things you can do in that respect. What toll-free numbers are available for what transactions or what product lines? The other thing you can do, of course, is when the customer gets to the wrong agent. You got to think hard now. Are you going to do a handle-in-place strategy and tell your agents, you handle the call no matter what the call is, even if it's not your skill group, right? That actually rewards people gaming the IVR, because I pick sales even though I have a non-sales question, and yet we have a handle-in-place strategy, so that agent is instructed to handle that call. So, if the broader strategy for the call center is, in fact, to have specialists and to have the call always answered by the most knowledgeable rep for that call, then I think you have to train the sales reps to say, if you get a non-sales call, be polite, apologize, tell the customer you're very sorry that you're going to have to transfer them in order to get them to the right agent, and maybe just encourage them, next time if you choose customer service in the IVR, you won't have to waste time with a salesperson like me, and you could be working with an agent immediately. So you just, some scripting and some policy can be used then to possibly encourage clients to actually, use the options you present. And then lastly, I think you have to look at your IVR and say, why is it so hard? I mean, are we presenting 12 options so people just say forget it and they try to game the IVR? Are all of our choices so wrongly worded? What is it that makes the IVR so dang hard to use that people feel that they have to game it? So, a couple of different paths you can take if that's the situation you're in.
Okay, next question. What about referencing your website in the IVR? Good or bad?
Bad. It's, the websites aren't, this was maybe good when websites were new. It's just, it's a complete waste of time now. 90% of your customers know you have a website. And these days, 90% of your callers already tried to get what they wanted from your website. So it's just not helpful in the IVR. You might put that reference in a queue message, but I wouldn't put that in an IVR. People, the phone channel is becoming a channel of escalation. I already tried the website. I already tried a Google search. I already tried, this or that. So I think the time is way past when it's helpful to promote the website in your IVR.
I totally agree. I had a situation like that, if I might add, where a salesperson told me to get information from the website, and I said no. But anyway, rolling right along. Do these analytics show in a report, or how would someone reviewing this information see the results?
Well, sure. This depends on how you choose to do analytics. We described a bunch of interesting metrics, and, it's up to each company to decide how are we going to get those metrics. Are we going to assign an analyst with the task of extracting logs from the IVR every day and spending 2 hours parsing the logs and building pivot tables and creating a chart, and who knows what else, or are we going to put in a system that actually, generates this stuff and does it in real time and does it automatically? What we provide the latter, obviously. We provide an analytic system that does the stuff automatically and makes it available on a website and online reports and real-time reports. So I guess it's it's up to everybody to decide. Once you decide what you want to do, how you want to go about this, whether you want to use a data-driven approach, whether you want to adopt a set of helpful and useful metrics, then it's up to you. Do you want to do it by hand, or do you want to invest in some technology and make it available in a report and make it automated?
Okay, this is a follow-up to the question we had previously on getting the quickest way to the agent, and hidden agent option, question mark, on voice 0?
Sure. Let's see, is that a reference to the case study we went over?
This is reference to the question that we had previously as far as getting to the agent the quickest and skimming the IVR to a certain extent.
Exactly. You know what? This is exactly from the second case study we went over. Let me just back up on that so we can have everybody follow along this question. So if you look at the action here, the action included a hidden agent option. So the reason this is valuable today is, customers know that there's an agent option. So the value of promoting an agent option is not necessarily a strong thing. So in this particular case, in the interest of customer satisfaction, right up front, they would say, if you want to talk to an agent, press 0. They're almost begging customers to not use the IVR. Thank you for calling, so-and-so. If you'd like to speak with an agent, press 0. Well, you're basically, begging people not to use the IVR because you're promoting the agent option right away. And a lot of times this is done because people say, well, we want to make sure customers don't feel trapped and they can get out. And I think what we find today is that everybody assumes that if you press 0, the IVR will detect it. If you say agent in a speak application, it will be heard. So so you don't need to promote it. And if you promote it, like this customer did, you encourage options to default route, and guess what? If they default route, some portion of them are going to land on the wrong queue, and they're going to have to be transferred. So in this particular case, it was a combination of better tailoring the language in the menus to the kinds of language the customer understood, and instead of encouraging opt-outs, make that hidden. So the agent option, the representative option, the zero option was there. It's just that the menu didn't start out by saying, hey, if you want to speak to an agent, press zero. So that's really, I think, another case where a well-intentioned idea. Let's make sure customers know that they can get out if they want to by promoting the agent option. It just basically encourages bypassing the IVR and not using the system. And then you pay for it, and the customer pays for it. In this case, the customer paid for it because they spent time dealing with two agents, repeating their information, call was longer, you have to staff for two agents. So it was just not, in this day and age when people know that the agent option is there, you don't need to promote it. Or if you want to promote it in a retry loop. Promote it deeper in the menus. Don't put it right there at the top.
Joe, that's the last question. I want to thank you very, very much for that great presentation. I'd like to thank everybody for attending today's session. Again, we have several questions on the location of the hard copy or PDFs. Just go to the agenda section on the virtual conference site. Go to the box that describes the session that you're looking for. There's a link in there which will get you to the PDF or the hard copy. And we'll also have the link to the recorded version of the presentations in there as well. Have a great day, everybody. I'm going to see you tomorrow.
Thank you, Larry. Thank you, everybody.